Hi everyone, my name is Dan Breen and I'm the curator of Cork Public Museum. Today I'm going to talk to you about some amazing photographic collections we've recently acquired. These collections date between 1860 and 1920 and are made up of both amateur and professionally taken images. To a modern audience, these images portray a Cork that is both recognisable and unrecognisable in equal measure. But they show a period in Cork's history that is crucial to understanding how Cork became the city we know today. I will also briefly touch on the nature of photography in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, highlighting how amateur and professional commercial photography were equally important in the creation of our newly acquired collections. I will now minimize my screen and we'll continue. A few points before I start. Funding for the acquisition of these collections was provided for by Cork City Council. All images shown in this presentation were photographed and prepared by our digital officer, Darren McGrath, and thanks to the many student volunteers who helped catalogue these collections over the last number of years. So, Cork Public Museum is Ireland's oldest local authority museum. We opened in April 1945 and our first curator was MJ O'Kelly of Newgrange fame. Our collections consist of about 40 to 50,000 objects, documents and images, and represents over 7,000 years of human history in Cork City and County. Since 2017, the museum has actively acquired a number of significant photographic collections containing many fascinating and rare views of Cork, its people and landscape in such an interesting time in Cork's history. So why collect them? Firstly, it's their quality and rarity. And these are important collections that need to be kept in public ownership. And that's why we acquired them. And we hope to make them available in due course for research and enjoyment for this and for future generations. As my time as curator, I have found that images are extremely popular with the public who really engage with them. And I think these collections will be a wonderful addition to any future exhibitions or publications that the museum decides to undertake. So today's presentation will be divided into two parts. The first is a brief overview of the individual collections that make up the entire assemblages of images. And the second, I will briefly discuss the museum's future plans for the images. So, due to time constraints, I'm unable to show you all the images we've acquired. I've tried to squeeze in as many as possible, but I aim to give you a flavour of the collection and the potential for further research. So we have divided our image collection into three distinct groups: the Lenihan collection, the eBay collection, and the Rutter collection. So we'll move on to the first. So the Lenihan collection. The Lenihan collection itself can be subdivided into three different subgroups, which we will get to in due course. But as a whole, the collection consists of 329 glass negative stereo views, glass slides, printed stereo views, photographs and postcards. The earliest date back to the early 1860s and are some of the oldest known images of Cork. So the very first subgroup of the Lenihan collection is called the Ringrose Atkins collection. The collection can be attributed to a family of amateur photographers made up of a father and his two sons. William Atkins, architect, and his two sons, William Ringrose Atkins, an accountant, and Ringrose Atkins, a doctor, all living in the spanning the 19th and early 20th century. Photography was just one of the many interests enjoyed by family members: archaeology, natural sciences, etc. The two sons were members of the Cork Historical and Archaeological Society. The earliest of the Ringrose Atkins collections can be attributed to the father, William Atkins, and seemed to cover buildings or structures that had recently been built or in the process of being built. And this would tie in with William Atkins' profession as an architect. So he was photographing things that interested him. he was able to combine his probably day job with his hobby, or and make them work for him within his life. So these, as you can see, St. Patrick's Bridge is September 1861, 1865, early 1860s, and then the Provincial Bank down here in 1865. Now, to take one of these glass negatives at that time was not an easy job. You required a great deal of equipment, chemicals, and good physical strength to be able to carry it all. Here's an image from the Ringrose Atkins collection showing the photographer at work, probably in some sort of dark room, developing the glass slide after exposure. So if you went out into the field, like this photographer here, you had to carry the equivalent of a dark room on your back, complete with glass slides, which were quite heavy, bottles of chemicals, and other equipment, as well as the camera itself. This website at the bottom here, who I recommend you visit, details how you had to undergo 8 to 10 steps just to produce the negative, and you required a very good high level of skill in mixing and handling chemicals. And this is the reason why very few female photographers existed at the time, due to the cumbersome nature of the work. Now, the Ringrose Atkins collection is mostly, though, made up of glass slides like these. These date between the 1880s and the 1900s, and these were most likely by the sons who followed their father's passion for photography. Again, this collection contains typical landscape and street images, but also captured significant historical events like these, from the visit of King Edward VII and his wife Queen Alexandra to Cork on August 1st, 1903. The Ringrose Atkins collection also show these people photos, capturing scenes of human interaction, giving us a glimpse of everyday life, the people in them. There was also personal and family images. And down here at the bottom, I just draw your attention to projectors, glass slide projectors that were typically used in homes or public spaces to display these slides for enjoyment and often for educational reasons. The larger projectors were often built for larger audiences, but these examples here are more portable, where you can see all the slides in boxes and everything kept inside this handy carry case. Now, the second subgroup of the Lenihan collection are printed stereo views. Now, there are a number of important points about these stereo views. They were predominantly, nearly always, made by photos taken by professional photographers. These were typically working for UK or US companies, capturing many scenes around Cork from the 1880s to the early 1900s. And these images would then be sold to the public in their countries. So there was commercial reasons behind their production. Stereo views were extremely popular in the 19th century, especially in the US. So these slides here that you see, Sunday's Well, these were sold for recreational, for enjoyment, but they could also be sold for educational purposes. In the days before airplanes or the internet, these were often the only means for people to experience or see what life was like in some far off place. And this brings us to the third point. They were only ever meant for foreign audiences. This means that when they were sold in packs, there would typically only be 1 or 2 slides in there from Cork. Michael Lenihan has spent decades sourcing most of these cards, and we now have 140 of them at the museum. But they were never meant to be published as a group of 140, so that very much contributes to the rarity of the collection. Here are a few more examples of the types of images captured. I would highlight that many of these images contain people, which to me kind of shows the importance of people in the images, made them more interesting and relatable to the audiences that they were intended to be viewed by. Now, this is what generally was used by people to view these stereo views. You have the stereo viewer with the card holder here. And it gave an almost 3D effect that you saw the image depending on how you move the slider back and forth. The third subgroup of the Lenihan collection are these miscellaneous glass slides. Again, they seem to have been a mix of both private amateur images as well as professional images. So as you can see here on the left, this seems a very amateurish photograph of Sunday's Well, the well itself that the area takes its name from. And then here on the right is a much more commercial minded creation by Underwood and Underwood in New York, who were at that time one of the biggest companies in the world that sold glass slides, stereo views, etc. Now we get on to the second group. This is the eBay collection. These were 50 glass slides depicting images from rarely photographed areas of Cork's 1902 International Exhibition. They were found in a property clearance in Cornwall amongst thousands of other slides depicting scenes from all over Britain. It seems they may be associated with Trinity House London, which is an organisation responsible for the upkeep and maintenance of British lighthouses, as well as other responsibility. It seems that an engineer working for Trinity House may have visited the exhibition with his camera and took the following images. Now, these images I came across online on eBay. I was able to contact the seller, and thankfully he took them all off the website and sold them directly to us at a very, very reduced price. As you may or may not know, myself and my friend and colleague Tom Spalding co-authored a book on the Cork International Exhibition, which was published in 2014. Now, we had access to a lot of images, such as these ones here from Guy and Company. But again, these were kind of typically only depicted the main or the more solemn sections of the exhibition, such as the industrial hall or the concert hall here. Which meant that this whole section, the western field or the western area, was often under photographed if we had little or no images of any of the of many of the attractions and exhibits. Whereas this side down here, the main part of the exhibition, there were plenty of official photographs and images already available to us. But we spent 4 years researching the book, and we published it in 2014, again without seeing many of the buildings we were talking about, and we had to heavily rely on the written accounts. But this eBay collection changed all that. We have a wonderful assortment of images from the Western Field, including the Switchback Railway, which was a version of a roller coaster, an early version of the roller coaster. The Canadian Hall down here. Again, another image here of the Canadian Hall. And this little building down here was a Cairo street scene, again, an attraction to the Egyptian harem, to attract visitors, bring the exotic and the alien to Cork. The Canadian Hall was a significant building, and to have had no photographs by the time we went to publication was very frustrating. We had read reports about an Egyptian harem, but again, no images, but more on these later. We also, in this eBay collection, got wonderful interior shots from the industrial hall here, and then the machinery halls here. This is a restaurant that was on site called Tirnanog, which I believe was teetotal. And this down here you may recognize is the present Cork Public Museum, earning its name, Shrubbery House. Now, on to the very last collection. We've called this the Rutter collection. This collection is the smallest. It's comprised of one single photo album, all created by one individual, John Rutter. And it is possibly my favorite collection of all the examples discussed today. You can see here the inside cover of the photo album, signed by him by my own dear self. So this is the Rutter family. They were Church of Ireland. According to the 1911 census, they were living at number 1 Clarence Terrace in St. Luke's. The father, also John Hoyton, and the son, the photographer, were described as merchant manufacturers. So it would seem from our research that the Rutter family were connected with the cider business. And it would seem that they were in Cork to set up as importers of Rutter's cider into Cork. The family are not mentioned in the 1901 census for the whole of Ireland. So most likely the family had just settled in Cork in and around the time these images were taken. The album also does, the photo album also contains family holiday photographs from Devon and Cornwall in 1903. And as you know, Devon, that area of the world, is well known for cider manufacture. So it would seem that John's father had come to Cork in around between 1901 and early 1902 to set up as a cider importer for the family business. By 1902, camera and photographic technology had evolved to such an extent that it was much more portable, like these box cameras here. And the process of making the images was much safer, and you didn't need as much of a chemistry degree than you did, let's say, 50 years before. These selfies here show how taking pictures of ourselves has always been something we've been drawn to. John Rutter would not, however, have had social media to broadcast these, just his own little photo album that we're lucky to get to look at over a century later. This, we believe, is a photograph from their house in St. Luke's, possibly from his bedroom. Many of the photos in the album are personal nature. They're personal images of scenes from around Cork, as well as of family and friends' days out. In light of our understanding that the Rutters were only just newly arrived in the city, these images show a young man exploring the city that had become his new home and would be for at least the next 10 years. John was 24 at the time. John was arriving in Cork at an exciting time. The Cork International Exposition of 1902-1903 brought special occasions to the city over its 2 years. It's also thought that it brought an estimated 1.8 million visitors to the city. So John must have felt that he had moved to a vibrant, cosmopolitan city with many possibilities and opportunities for a young man about to embark on the rest of his adult life. So the album, again, offers some new views and perspectives of the main areas of the exhibition grounds. But I think where the album is strongest is when the images he captures of specific significant occasions, such as the opening day procession on May the 1st, 1902. Now, this occasion, we are lucky enough to have in our possession at the museum the Mitchell and Kenyon film footage that shows some of this procession making its way through Cork. May 1st, as you know, was May Day. So this meant that there was a strong trade union involvement. In fact, there was 37 trade unions, 13 marching bands, the National Foresters, and various special guests such as the Lord Mayor of Dublin and the Earl of Bandon, who was the president of the exhibition. These images here are possibly my favorite of all the images. They're just so visceral. You can get the sense of the occasion, the movement, the excitement, the waving of the hats in the foreground, the running of the children in the background. It's a very much a boots on the ground, right in the action. Something that's often missing from the more professionally taken photographs. You can almost imagine yourself in these photographs being on the corner of Grand Parade and Washington Street, enjoying the spectacle of the day. Another event captured by John Rutter was the International Rowing Race that was held on July 22nd to 24th, 1902. Now, it was attended by at least 20,000 people. We know the final, there was 20 teams from across the UK, Ireland and Europe, and the final was contested between Leander Club on Henley on Thames in London, and the Berlin Rowing Club. Now the Leander Club won, and I believe the trophy that the Cork International Rowing Race trophy is still proudly displayed in their clubhouse to this day. Now, there were another previously mentioned attraction that I'd mentioned before at the Cork International Exhibition was this Egyptian Hireme. It was designed to bring the exotic and the alien to the banks of the Lee. It did apparently contain at least one authentically Egyptian apartment. There were plans, I believe, to bring a Swiss and a Ghanaian villages, but these did not materialize. Now, I had read reports of an Egyptian lady who looked after the exhibit, but I'd never seen her or had an adequate description of her. So this image, again, is another important insight into the exhibition. She obviously left an impression on John Rutter as he quoted her directly underneath the photograph. Very good, very nice. Now, the Canadian Hall, or the Canadian Pavilion, one of two international countries to exhibit at the Cork International Exhibition, and New Zealand were the other. Now, this building was 5,000 square foot, and it cost about £10,000, and Arthur Hill designed it. Now, the reason behind it, we won't get too much into it, but Canada, Cork was one of many exhibitions Canada would have exhibited at, partly to show off the provisions, its raw material, the potential of living and working in Canada, but ultimately its aim was to attract immigrants, to get people to come to work and to live in Canada. As I said before, myself and Tom Spalding were unable to find any photographs of the Canadian Pavilion. And yet, 5 years later, after the book was published, I have at least 10 now at the museum, including 2 interior ones. And you can see very much from these interior ones that the idea was to impress visitors and entice some more to come to Canada to live and to work there. So without the John Rutter collection, many of these attractions or insights about the exhibition would not be possible. So what are the museum's future plans for the images? Our plan is to continue to research the images to see what other information can be gleaned from them, to work with local historians and historical societies to build up our database of 19th century Cork. Future exhibitions, both on-site and online, as well as potential museum publications on the images and the histories they tell. We're working to improve public online accessibility to the images for research and enjoyment. And we're also working to introduce an online system that allows the public to purchase print copies of some of the images. If you'd like to know more about Cork Public Museum, please check out our website here at the bottom. And before I finish, I would again like to thank Darragh McGrath for all the images provided. I would like to also thank Michael Lenihan, who continuing to work with the museum on better understanding the images and the people displayed in them. Finally, I'd like to give my sincerest thanks and gratitude to Bernadette and Michelle at the Friends of the Crawford Art Gallery for the invite to speak today and for their help and support in its preparations. Take care. All the best.